The wedding hall fell silent the moment the groom lifted the veil from his bride's face. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. He was 24 years old, young, strong, and full of dreams. The woman sitting beside him was 54, old enough to be his mother. Some guests laughed behind their hands. Others whispered cruel things under their breath. Even the groom himself looked shattered inside. But what happened after that forced marriage would leave an entire town speechless forever. Before we begin, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that life can change in ways no one expects, and you never know which story might touch your heart the deepest. The rain hammered against the windows of the small village church while Daniel Carter stood frozen at the altar. His hands trembled so badly that the ring nearly slipped from his fingers. Across from him sat Margaret Hayes, a wealthy widow whose silver hair glimmered beneath the church lights. She looked calm, dignified even, while Daniel looked like a man being led to his execution. The priest cleared his throat nervously. "Do you, Daniel Carter, take Margaret Hayes to be your lawful wife?" Daniel swallowed hard. Every eye in the room burned into him. He could hear the whispers already. "He's marrying her for money. How disgusting. That woman is old enough to raise him." But none of them knew the truth. Daniel's mother was dying. 6 months earlier, doctors had discovered a severe heart condition. The surgery she needed cost more money than Daniel could ever imagine earning in his small-town job repairing farm equipment. He worked day and night, sometimes without sleep, trying to save enough. But the bills kept growing while his mother grew weaker. Then Margaret Hayes entered his life. Margaret owned almost half the land surrounding the village. People feared her wealth and envied her silence. After her husband died years earlier, she became distant from everyone. Rumors followed her everywhere. Some said she was cruel. Others claimed she was cursed. One evening Daniel had been fixing a broken tractor near Margaret's estate when he fainted from exhaustion. Margaret herself found him lying in the mud outside her barn. When he woke up inside her mansion, embarrassed and confused, she asked him one simple question. "How much would it cost to save your mother?" Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "What? I know about the surgery," she said quietly. "I also know you've sold almost everything you own trying to pay for it." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I'll figure something out." Margaret studied him carefully before speaking again. "What if I offered you a deal?" That was the beginning of everything. Margaret explained that her late husband's family controlled her inheritance through an old clause in his will. If she remarried, she would gain complete ownership of her fortune instead of remaining under the control of her husband's greedy relatives. But because of her age and reputation, no respectable man wanted to marry her. "I don't need love," she told Daniel. "I need a husband on paper. In return, your mother gets the surgery immediately." Daniel felt sick hearing the proposal. "You want me to marry you? It would only be legal," Margaret said calmly. "You could continue your life however you wish afterward." Daniel rejected her instantly. But 2 weeks later, his mother collapsed. The doctors warned him she had little time left. That night Daniel sat alone outside the hospital, broken beyond words. He stared at the unpaid bills in his shaking hands while memories of his mother flooded his mind, all the sacrifices she made raising him alone after his father abandoned them. She worked herself nearly to death cleaning houses so Daniel could finish school. She skipped meals so he could eat. And now she was dying because he was poor. The next morning, Daniel knocked on Margaret Hayes' door. "I'll do it," he whispered. Margaret simply nodded, as though she had expected him all along. The wedding happened 3 days later. And the humiliation began immediately. People mocked Daniel openly in town. Old friends stopped speaking to him. His girlfriend Emily cried hysterically when she heard the news. "You sold yourself," she screamed at him outside the hospital. "You chose money over dignity." Daniel wanted to explain the truth, but he couldn't betray the agreement with Margaret. So he stood there silently while the woman he loved walked away forever. Meanwhile, Margaret's relatives were furious. Her late husband's nephew, Victor Hayes, hated the marriage most of all. Victor had spent years expecting to inherit Margaret's fortune someday. Daniel's sudden appearance destroyed those plans overnight. Victor confronted Daniel after the wedding reception. "You think you've won," Victor hissed. "You're nothing but a desperate boy. She'll ruin your life." Daniel ignored him, but Victor's eyes held something darker than anger. Hatred. After the marriage, Daniel moved into Margaret's enormous mansion. The atmosphere inside felt cold and strange. They barely spoke at first. Daniel kept to himself while Margaret spent most of her days reading in the library or walking through her massive gardens alone. The arrangement felt unbearable. At dinner, silence stretched endlessly between them. At night, Daniel lay awake wondering how his life had become this nightmare. But slowly, something unexpected began happening. Daniel noticed Margaret wasn't cruel at all. She was lonely, painfully lonely. One afternoon he found her sitting alone in the greenhouse crying softly while holding an old photograph. Daniel hesitated before asking, "Are you okay?" Margaret quickly wiped her tears. "It's nothing." But Daniel glanced at the photograph. It showed a young Margaret beside a teenage girl. "Your daughter?" he asked gently. Margaret's face darkened instantly. "She died 22 years ago." Daniel froze. "I'm sorry. She was 16. Margaret stared at the photo with trembling hands. A drunk driver hit her car during a storm. For the first time, Daniel saw past the wealthy widow everyone feared. Beneath the expensive clothes and elegant posture was a grieving mother who never recovered from losing her child. From that day forward, the tension between them slowly softened. They began talking during meals. Margaret asked about Daniel's childhood. Daniel listened to stories about Margaret's younger years before tragedy hardened her heart. And for the first time in years, laughter returned to the mansion. Meanwhile, Daniel's mother successfully underwent surgery. Her health improved rapidly, and seeing her smile again filled him with relief so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "You saved me," she whispered one evening while holding his hand. Daniel couldn't bring himself to tell her the cost. But outside their fragile peace, danger was growing. Victor Hayes became obsessed with destroying the marriage. He hired investigators to dig through Daniel's past, hoping to expose him as a fraud. When that failed, he turned crueler. One night Daniel returned home to find the mansion vandalized. Windows shattered, paint splattered across the walls. Gold digger, monster bride, disgusting couple. Margaret stared at the destruction silently while servants cleaned the mess. Daniel clenched his fists with rage. "This is because of me." "No," Margaret replied softly. "This is because people fear what they don't understand." But the attacks continued. Newspapers mocked them. Social media exploded with insults. Strangers photographed them in public and laughed openly. Daniel began regretting everything. One evening he packed a suitcase quietly, determined to leave. As he walked toward the front door, Margaret stopped him. "You're leaving." Daniel couldn't look at her. "This life is destroying both of us." Margaret remained silent for a moment. "Do you know why I chose you?" Daniel frowned. "You were desperate." "No," Margaret said softly. "Because when you fainted outside my barn, even unconscious, you were still clutching medicine for your mother." Daniel stared at her speechless. "You reminded me of the kind of love people rarely have anymore," she continued. "A love willing to sacrifice everything." Her voice cracked slightly. "My daughter loved like that too." For the first time since the marriage began, Daniel truly understood her. Margaret never wanted a fake husband. She wanted someone human beside her again. Someone who cared. Daniel slowly put his suitcase down. Months passed. The strange pair slowly transformed into something neither expected: family. Not romance. Not passion. Something deeper. Margaret encouraged Daniel to return to school and study engineering, something he had abandoned years earlier because of poverty. She paid his tuition despite his protests. "You already gave me more than money could buy," she told him. Daniel, in return, brought life back into the mansion. He repaired neglected parts of the estate, organized community events, and slowly helped Margaret reconnect with the town she had isolated herself from for decades. People began seeing them differently. Not as a scandal, but as two wounded souls who saved each other. Then came the night everything changed forever. Daniel received a frantic phone call from the hospital. His mother had collapsed again. He raced through the storm toward town, but halfway there another vehicle slammed violently into his truck. The crash sent metal twisting across the road. Daniel barely survived. When he woke up in the hospital days later, Margaret sat beside his bed holding his hand tightly. Her face looked exhausted from sleepless nights. "You stayed," Daniel whispered weakly. Margaret smiled through tears. Of course, police later discovered the shocking truth. Victor Hayes had tampered with Daniel's brakes. He intended to kill him. The revelation stunned the entire town. Victor was arrested immediately, and the scandal destroyed the Hayes family reputation overnight. But the accident left Daniel with severe injuries requiring months of recovery. During that difficult time, Margaret never left his side. She cooked for him, read books to him, encouraged him through painful therapy sessions. And one evening, while sitting together on the mansion porch watching the sunset, Daniel finally spoke the truth buried in his heart. "When I married you," he said quietly, "I thought my life was over." Margaret looked down sadly. "I know, but you gave me back more than I lost." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Daniel gently rested his hand over hers. "You taught me that love isn't always what people expect." Years later, their story became legendary in the village. Not because a young man married an older woman for money, but because two broken people rescued each other from loneliness, grief, and despair. Daniel eventually finished university and started his own engineering company. Margaret used her wealth to build hospitals and scholarship programs in memory of her daughter. And though gossip never fully disappeared, something stronger replaced it: respect. On Margaret's 70th birthday, the entire town gathered at the mansion for a celebration. Children ran through the gardens laughing while music filled the air. At one point Margaret pulled Daniel aside. "You know," she smiled softly, "people still think our marriage was strange." Daniel laughed. "Maybe it was." Margaret looked at the crowd surrounding them. "But strange things can still become beautiful." Daniel nodded slowly. Because she was right. Life doesn't always give us love in the form we expect. Sometimes family is born from sacrifice. Sometimes healing arrives through pain. And sometimes the people we judge the fastest are carrying the heaviest scars. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Daniel looked around at the life they had built together, not through romance or perfection, but through compassion, loyalty, and kindness. And in that moment, he realized something powerful. The forced marriage that once felt like a prison had become the very thing that saved them both. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who still believes kindness can change lives. Because sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most unforgettable endings.